So our next panel is going to be focused on strategic sourcing, which is a very common topic in industry and making its way into government. So I'd like to introduce to the stage Kristin Gill. She's our Chief Delivery Officer here at GovernmentCIO, and she will be moderating the panel. She will be joined by panelist Michael Conroy. He's the Deputy Director for Strategic Sourcing Acquisition Division of NOAA. And Johnston Williamson, Director, Engineering Service, Office of Procurement, Acquisition, and Logistics at Veterans Affairs. Thank you all three, and I will let you take it away here. Kristin.
Can you hear me? All right. Thank you, Mike, very much. I'm very excited to be here at this event talking about a topic that I've really built my career on, and that's acquisition, and specifically acquisition innovation, which I'm very passionate about. So thank you, JW and Mike, for joining us this morning to talk about the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative and the future of government contracting. So for those of you in the audience that don't know, the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative is a government-wide coalition of agencies that's committed to improving acquisition processes, mostly by adopting industry best practices, moving towards strategic sourcing, and really moving away from the siloed agency-specific acquisitions. And so with us today, we have JW and Mike, who have really built their careers on improving acquisition and are now charged with moving towards strategic sourcing at their respective agencies. So with that, I'll go into an introduction of the panelists. So JW, you and I have worked together for several years during my tenure at the VA and before that the Army. And you've recently taken a new job at the Office of Strategic Sourcing with the VA. So if you could, in your intro, just kind of give us a background of your career path and really what led you to this new position that you're in today.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Johnston Williamson. I go by JW, just so you understand the connection here between my introduction and Kristin's references. Anyway, I come from actually the DoD side of the house. I was an IT engineer program manager by career, by trade. Did about 25 years in IT acquisition, ACAT 1, PM type stuff for the Department of the Army. And then the last 10 years, except for about the last week or couple, I've been working at the Technology Acquisition Center for the Department of Veterans Affairs as Director of Engineering. If those that are not familiar there, that was stood up 10 years ago when I started to go ahead and try to centralize a lot or the vast majority of the IT acquisition work that was done within the VA. Just a short period of time, I transitioned over to the Office of Strategic Sourcing within the VA, and I'm now the Director of Category Management for IT Services within the VA. So I'm going to be leading a lot of efforts as far as trying to accomplish a lot of the initiatives and so forth that Kristin was making reference to as far as FSSI and trying to be better stewards of taxpayer dollars, meet some of the initiatives that Tracy was just talking about to try to make things quicker and faster and better for the end user while still thinking big from a strategic sourcing perspective.
Thanks, JW. And Mike, you've also had a really exciting career. I actually think our paths probably crossed while we were both overseas working on different acquisition initiatives. So if you could just talk a little bit about, your background and kind of what led you to the current position that you have with NOAA.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Mike Conroy. I spent 23 years in the Army on the military side. First 8 years or so was in transportation and logistics, and then I went into the military acquisition corps, and the last 14 years I spent doing a mixture of contracting and program management, a lot of overseas assignments in contracting, doing contingency operations and so forth. Spent 4 years in the Defense Contract Management Agency overseeing larger programs, and spent a year and a half as a director for one of their Seattle offices. My last assignment was in Huntsville at the Army Contracting Command headquarters, and I retired there in 2016 and was hired by NOAA into the Strategic Sourcing Acquisition Division as the IT Services Branch Chief. IT Services is one of the two main areas of spend for NOAA in terms, of strategic sourcing. You have professional technical services and then the IT services. So I did that for 2 years. And the main program I support there is called the NOAA Link program. NOAA Link is not a contract like many people think. It's actually a suite of contracts for IT commodities and services that we strategically source either at the enterprise level or government level or both. And then we are also doing the NOAA Mission IT Services contract, which is actually out on solicitation right now. That's a strategically sourced vehicle for IT services that we're also leveraging GSA Federal Supply Schedule under the category management principles to award that. Then on the ProTech side, that's also a program and a contract. It's a series of 4 different domain contracts. In that case, those are scientifically oriented professional technical services, so we award full and open IDIQs for those, and then we manage the program within the Strategic Sourcing Acquisition Division. I took over as the Deputy Director in March for Strategic Sourcing, so that now expands my breadth of responsibilities with regard to strategic sourcing. We also do some other enterprise-level support in terms of high-performance computing and construction, supporting our corporate services staff office.
All right. Thank you, Mike. So that was a great background on yourself as well as, kind of where NOAA is right now with strategic sourcing. So JW, where is VA right now with adopting strategic sourcing?
All right, so I would say I don't want to say we're in infant stages, but because we've been very involved, my time at the TAC, very involved with GSA and OMB as far as the initiatives, as far as all the category management work groups for laptops, desktops, mobile, et cetera. So we've played a big role as part of the work group to go ahead and help identify those requirements and then follow those requirements in some of the enterprise vehicles we actually have within the VA specifically. As far as T4 and T4 Next Gen, which is an enterprise IT services vehicle, where we try to strategize as far as the sourcing for IT services within the VA. There were other commodity vehicles as well, but we also make heavy usage with respect to other vehicles like SOUP and like to go ahead and try to promote economies of scale, requirements, consolidation efforts, and trying to make smarter buys for the taxpayer.
Great, thank you. So Mike, how has strategic sourcing improved procurement at your agency, and what is NOAA really hoping to achieve with this strategic sourcing initiative?
So our big goal at NOAA is always to identify a reasonably small number of highly capable companies that can support our unique science mission. So that's sort of our top-level principle, and everything flows down from there. What we do then is apply category management principles and how we can streamline the process for our buying to make it faster. So if you use a government-wide acquisition contract like NASA SOUP and use it for your IT commodity buys and some other IT buys, it makes the process more streamlined. You start to get data that you can request from the program office that supports them. So you save money, you streamline the process, and then you're also then able to start to have better data to do your spend analysis on, which is a really challenging part of the whole strategic sourcing part, is the upfront part of having the data so that you can analyze your spend so that you can then come up with a plan for a strategic sourcing solution. So applying those principles has done those things for us. But we're continuing to evolve as category management is continuing to evolve. Great,
thank you. So JW, you mentioned that VA is really in its sort of infancy with strategic sourcing. And I know, the Technology Acquisition Center has really adopted some really innovative strategies for acquisition, but VA is really just starting to truly adopt strategic sourcing best practices. So what are some of the challenges, you're 2 weeks into your new job, what are some of the challenges that you see related to the full adoption of strategic sourcing for the VA?
So from my perspective, to go to one of Mike's points, a lot of what strategic sourcing is based on is data. The utilization collection of that data, the utilization data as well as the spend data, not just contracts, but then requirements. How that data is collected, how it's refined, how it's analyzed, to support some of the different initiatives and so forth we've been talking about. My past experience within the VA, that's, I believe, been a challenge, especially when you're dealing with such a broad, shall we say, audience with over 160 medical centers and so forth, to try to get your hands wrapped around that whole area of requirements to support consolidation and economies of scale, streamlining acquisition to try to leverage innovative ideas, I see as kind of one of the first challenges. A second challenge I have, to touch on the supplier management component, is under strategic sourcing and supplier management, vendor management methodologies in the private sector, I can go ahead and use KPIs, SLAs, performance type characteristics, monitor the vendor's performance, and then incentivize and or reward the vendors directly as a result of that. In the federal space, you have some additional challenge with respect to federal acquisition regulations, competition, and the like, and how to go ahead and leverage that, not to just perform the post-award management that I think we often struggle with, in my personal opinion, but then also to reward and incentivize the private sector, such that when they do perform like that and we track that and they make appropriate adjustments, that we can reward them and leverage what they can bring to the table. I would be remiss within the VA side of the house. We have to follow the Vets First public law. So, you have small business, and I know some of the GWAC vehicles and so forth have their components for SDVOSBs and the like. And I'm not a contracting person or a legal person, but I understand there are some hurdles that are slowly being worked out with respect to that. And I'll throw this on top, is there's been a big buzzword or a series of buzzwords called managed services. I personally have a question as far as not only how are we going to implement managed services within the federal space, but then how are the FSSI vehicles going to be either how do they currently or how do they need to adapt to be able to support that?
All right, great, thank you. So in both of your professional opinions, and Mike, we'll start with you, what is the future of federal acquisition as it relates to strategic sourcing? And what do you see as the benefits of the federal government moving into this direction?
I think the future is what we're seeing right now with category management and the promotion of best-in-class contracts, which many of the current government-wide acquisition contracts are also designated as best-in-class. It's a process they have to go through with OMB to get that designation. And then the guidance that comes down is to promote the use of those best-in-class contracts. What that means for industry is that there's going to be a continued effort to reduce the number of individual contracts that agencies award, and instead to leverage those government-wide contracts to execute task orders for those services. And so I always tell the vendors that we engage with at NOAA that they should be constantly looking for opportunities to be on those vehicles, because there's going to be less full and open, less separate contract awards. And so if you're not on those vehicles, then you won't be able to participate as much. I think the benefit, again, for us as a smaller bureau, so you have really large agencies like the Department of Defense and then the Department of Army and so forth and so on. NOAA is not that large. We're a small bureau. We don't have as many resources. And so the idea is that we avoid a lot of costs by not having to go through those larger acquisitions and being able to leverage those contracts that are already in place. Again, it saves us time. When you're using under the FAR Part 8 procedures, which is the federal supply schedules, or FAR Part 16, which is executing orders off of IDIQs, those parts of the FAR are by nature streamlined. So it makes it easier to get to an award as opposed to using FAR Part 15 procedures. So the benefit, again, for us is cost avoidance, streamlined acquisition procedures. It narrows down so that you can develop those strategic partnerships with a smaller number of vendors, especially, again, for a smaller bureau like ours that we don't spend as much. So we don't need as large of a base, but we need a very good one and one that's focused on our needs. So that's pretty much sums up kind of what I think where it's going and what the benefits are.
Thank you. JW?
To piggyback on some of the things Michael was just talking about, I think that from the strategic mindset of making less buys, it's going to drive our agency as well as some of the other agencies to think bigger, do better requirements and acquisition planning, which I personally feel we've struggled with. I would say not only on the, well, that would facilitate the front end, right, as far as you don't necessarily need more enterprise contracts as much as just being able to capture and reflect your requirements more from an enterprise perspective. Whether you put more vehicles together or leverage existing vehicles can be determined later as part of the strategy workout. On the back end, as far as post-award, I kind of touched on this a little bit before, but hopefully to strengthen our knowledge and use of, again, KPIs, SLAs, and so forth, to actually monitor the vendor's performance, do a better job as far as post-award management. Even, I've been through a lot of technical evaluations in my 10 years at the TAC. There's a factor called past performance. I have yet to see an acquisition, and I'm sure there's a lot of other ones, but I have yet to really see an acquisition decision that's really been driven by past performance. It's always best value as far as technical compared to your cost. And I know there's a lot of other factors as far as vets involvement, and those are all important, and past performance is important. I think we could take it to possibly to another level. I think that's what I'm trying to point out here. And then just simply accountability. With all this information, both on our side as far as planning and on the vendor side as far as performance, we're going to be able to hold people, agencies, organizations more accountable to be doing things smarter and faster. So.
Great, thank you. So not sure if any of you have seen it, but there was a recent GAO study that revealed that the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative has resulted in procurement savings of nearly $500 million in the last 5 years. So the challenge is that only 10% of addressable government-wide spend went through the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative vehicles. So why do you think agencies are not living up to their commitments of leveraging these solutions? Mike?
So one thing I would start out with is I think that this whole process, in the way that it's explained too in the guidance, is that the key performance indicators, they measure maturity in the process of category management. And so I'd say I think that GAO report was in 2016. I would say in the last 3 years, just like with a lot of other things, the maturity has increased dramatically, and that agencies now, all the arrows are pointing in the right direction, but it's still a maturity process. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time for all of these processes to play out. Contracts have timelines to them. You're not going to end contracts because you have new guidance. So it gets factored into the acquisition planning process. But I think I looked on the acquisition gateway, which is managed by GSA, and I think in FY18, of the 6 key performance indicators, government-wide, they were met or exceeded in 5 of the 6 categories. The one that didn't quite meet the goal was the reduction in contracts, and that goal was set at 10%, and I think the government achieved 7%. So there's still a reduction in contracts, just didn't quite meet the goal. So I think all the arrows are pointing in the right direction, but there's always going to be more to do, but it is a maturity process.
JW, any other thoughts on why you think agencies are maybe not using some of these FSSI solutions?
Well, I don't know if I have to be careful for what I say, being from the TAC or my past experience with the TAC, but there's, as I said, there's the Vets First challenge that we have within the VA that's unique to our agency. There are issues or questions as far as fees and so forth that the agency has to pay to other organizations to go ahead and utilize those vehicles. And there's actually been recent changes in some of the vehicles as far as fee and structure and so forth that I think needs to be discussed and worked out to go ahead and better incentivize other agencies in the VA to go ahead and make better use of that and maximize the dollar to maximize the return to the veteran or whatever customer you might be working with. But really the big picture is, I think, the requirements piece. Again, there's been such a struggle, in my opinion, with respect to collecting requirements, lots of times the contracting folks are dealing with little pieces that are coming in and going out, first in, first out, and there's not necessarily enough effort on the front end to plan and consolidate so that the requirement you're passing to the contracting community is this strategic vision so that I can easily leverage the vehicles that best provide that service, like the GWAC vehicles.
Do you think agencies really want to own, they want to own their own vehicles, and that's why they're not moving towards some of these larger GWACs?
I do. So that's why in our case, going back to our strategic goal of having a reasonably small number of suppliers that support our mission. So how do we come up with an acquisition strategy that meets that and also meets the category management principles? And so that's where, in our case with Nimitz, we decided on a solution where we can do a multiple award BPA off of IT Schedule 70. So then we do get that smaller slice that we need. We are meeting category management principles. The cost issue is out there, and that does come up sometimes when you're presenting an acquisition plan, and then you're starting to show the fee that you have to pay for access to the contract. So that discussion does occur. But those GWACs, they're doing things the best that they can to minimize those fees. But the other thing that we can start doing as a smaller bureau that doesn't have a GWAC is we can compare and contrast those GWACs, and we can start to select the one that meets the criteria for what we're trying to do in terms of minimizing the cost that we have to pay for access to the contract and so forth. So that does come up.
I guess just one thing I'd like to add with respect to the conversation here is strategic sourcing, right? Big picture buying, making best for your buck, reducing administration costs, things like that. As even set up, you have best-in-class GWAC vehicles, which most of the conversation has been revolving around. There are vehicles like, I'll toot the horn for the VA as far as the T4. It is a Tier 2 vehicle, multi-agency vehicle that is used by other external agencies. That may be other opportunities, again, as far as, again, the end game of buying things strategically. I think that there's probably several, it's just one of the tools in the toolbox of the regular contracting officer. And however we can go ahead and adapt those vehicles to make them the best, the quickest, the cheapest, whoever prevails there will be the leader.
Great, thank you.
One other thing.
Go ahead.
One other thing in terms of the maturity of it is the definition of common. So in our professional technical services area, we don't consider our scientific professional technical services to be common. And so that discussion comes up a lot also with IT. What is common and what is specialized services? The idea behind category management and use of GWACs is those are common services. So that's another point of discussion that occurs along the way in the process.
It's a great point. Thank you. So we're just about out of time, but I wanted to open it up to the audience to see if anybody has any questions for our panelists this morning. Yes.
As a complete newbie to this event, excuse me, I'm just representing myself actually. I'm wondering if in NOAA and the IT kind of wheelhouse that you oversee, does that also include acquisition of people trying to bring scientific innovations to you? I'm actually in the sustainability background, but I'm coming into the IT arena, and I'm just wondering if y'all are already making those connections, because cybersecurity is a big missing part in terms of like facilities and that type of stuff. So I'm just wondering if y'all are already looking in that direction.
Yes, and in fact, if you look at a lot of our current NOAA Link vendors, they started out as science companies that then drifted over into IT. So there's definitely a merger between the two in NOAA, and we have constant discussions about whether is it a professional technical service or is it an IT service. And so we look at there's always science in there, and then there's always IT in there, and so it kind of depends on which one's the predominant. Are we doing science supported by some IT, or are we doing IT applying it to scientific methods and objectives and so forth? So that comes up a lot. We're constantly talking about that. But if you look at the background of the companies that are on our current NOAA link contract, most of them are not straight up IT companies. They started out as something else and then started doing IT services along the way. So that gives them that operational insight that makes supporting our unique mission better.
Great. Okay, well, we are out of time, but I want to thank both of you very much for being here today talking about this really important topic.
Thank you.
Thank you.